been dealt with, the Christchurch Earthquake Memorial Relief Fund applications, which means that the way the minutes will reflect that was in anticipation of the decision being made.
Could I just speak about supplementaries once again?
Oh, well, I've already put the motion. Look,
I'm fine with the motion today, but I think going forward we need some sort of a policy as to the acceptance of supplementaries and the degree of urgency for bringing a supplementary forward. I sometimes think, if
they all meet the test on this occasion.
Do they?
Yeah, with the exception of the public notification of the provisional local alcohol policy, they all meet the test. And they have, we are seriously looking at making sure that these don't come through unless there is good reason. So I asked for the insurance subcommittee report to come through. It is true we could leave it, but it's a short briefing report. We could have left it for another fortnight, but people were concerned that they hadn't heard from the subcommittee. Clarification of existing delegations to community boards is core critical to a decision that Hagley Ferrymead are making. The council's submission on ECAN's LTP is time limited. The LGNZ conference report, we've got to notify who's attending, that's time limited. And the Christchurch Earthquake Memorial Relief Fund, well, we've already done it for a reason, as you can see.
Can we see the criteria, please, for...
Well, the criteria are in my head and in Carleen Edwards' head. So, but I'm happy that her and I sit down and establish a set of criteria for you to look at. Yeah. All right. So the next item on the agenda is, in fact, your own committee's report. And I know, because I've read this report, that you are not going to move this item on the agenda because you voted against it. So I think Glenn would like to move it and Ali would like to second it. So I will, have we got staff here to assist us with this one? Richard Osborne. Right, have people got questions for staff? Yanni?
Just on page 133, do you have a date for that table 1? The most recent up-to-date information?
2014.
June 2014?
Okay, and just in a general sense, what that's telling me is that despite the fact that we've lost a large number of machines, we still have some of the highest expenditure in the country per person.
Yes.
On these machines?
Yes, second highest in the country.
Right. Have you got any kind of idea why
the expenditure hasn't changed?
Yeah, because one of the things that one of the assumptions behind the sinking lid previously has been that limiting access, the more availability and accessibility, the more problem gaming issues and the more community harm. But actually this is kind of starting to show that maybe there's some other factors as well that we need to be thinking of.
There's no clear reason for the expenditures being so high, or rather not changing. The Department of Internal Affairs said that it's just a complex situation and there could be all sorts of different reasons. And I've looked at the literature and there's no hard and fast answer.
So that when they say that there are complex reasons, what are the sort of reasons that they've given for the difference in here? Is it any of it's earthquake related?
No, I don't think it's earthquake related. It's simply that if people are going to gamble, then they will, and they have a certain amount that they generally spend, and so that's what they do.
What they've discovered is that they just use the same, if there are fewer machines, they use what's available more intensively, so that the actual habit of gambling in the population doesn't really vary much, and the amount that they've got doesn't vary much. The expenditure in Christchurch is very level, really. A few spikes, kind of around the earthquakes, but then back to level again around that $20 million a quarter?
That was probably because the casino was closed from February through to June, and so people were probably gambling more in the pubs and clubs because they couldn't gamble in the casino.
Right. Paul?
Just on that, has there been any work done on the age group of people that actually gamble? And I'm just thinking, considering we have a very high ageing population, does that have a bearing on those?
The Asian population?
Yeah.
Ageing.
I think they... Ageing or Asian?
Ageing. We've got an older population here in Christchurch. I'm just wondering if that is a factor of why it hasn't changed much.
Don't think so. It's across the board,
It is.
although typically Maori and lower socio-economic area people tend to gamble more.
So, so you're saying that even if we had more machines, or if the machines were simply distributed elsewhere, that it wouldn't make a difference to the figures?
No, it would just move the problem from one area to another.
That's interesting, because that's complete opposite of what the advice has always been. It's the complete opposite of the basis of the policy.
The report on page 131 actually in 4.2 says there is little evidence that a relocation policy that moved venues and machines away from areas of low income will reduce any harm caused by gambling and over expenditure.
Because I remember a case in Point last year where we wanted to support the removal of a licence from one area and a transfer to the... Well, they were closing down. They wanted to shift the machines into Addington Raceway, which is kind of where gambling happens.
Yeah, we wanted to shift half the machines out of Shirley into the raceway, and
this policy stopped us from doing it.
From doing it, yeah.
So why are we recommending not to change the policy?
That's what I'm intrigued by. So everything that you are now telling us is, this report tells us, is actually contrary to the basis upon which I'm assuming the policy was initially derived. That if you cut the number of machines, the inclination and the actual expenditure on gambling diminishes. But what I'm now hearing is that it's a constant. It doesn't really matter how many machines you have.
Or where they are.
Or where they are.
So if you relocate them, it doesn't make a difference to the amount that people spend.
No.
That's what we're assuming based on this evidence that we've got, that the expenditure stays relatively stable, and that even though venues and machines have dropped, the expenditure hasn't varied. Now, yeah, well, that's what we... Now, we understand, we know that there are a lot of New Zealand studies and in Australia that show that accessibility does make a difference, that if you are within 5 kilometres of a venue, you are more likely to gamble or use the pokey than if you were further away. But that's what we mean when we say it's complex. It's a complex situation. But we did want to put in front of you the fact that, we do have this evidential base now that suggests that the expenditure doesn't vary very much, even when the numbers are dropping.
And do we know that, sorry, Leanne, do we know that, so we've got a very high level of machines per 1,000 residents, relatively. Do we know that that's true for all levels of machines? So is this evidence borne out in other places and in sort of other densities of gambling opportunity?
Like with casinos?
So, for example, do we have research from other places in the country, from other places offshore, where they've got less than 4.59 per 1,000 residents, where if that dropped below a certain level, that the gambling drops off, or is it just at that level?
Yeah, it's just Tauranga District is a reasonable, it's not a bad example, I guess. I mean, they have 37 venues, for example, and only 520 machines, but they spend per capita, per resident, $5.71. Oh, sorry, machines, sorry, expenditure is $77.21, which is higher than what we spend in Christchurch per...
And we have fewer machines.
Yeah.
Yes, but does this research, is this research sort of situational, or would it be borne out across other research that we've looked at?
What was that? I can't
Is it situational?
Like, is this research profound enough and detailed enough, or is there contradictory research around such that we might want to change our view upon the relocation of machines?
Well, no, it is like all the literature says that it's a complex social issue, that up until 2009, the most recent study that we looked at in the impact, the social impact, suggested that accessibility does make a difference. So, yeah, there is contradictory.
Yeah. All that literature says that, except that this literature says otherwise. Well, it's not. It's literature. The studies. That was it's referred to as a meta-analysis of surveys of problem gambling prevalence, but our actual evidence of what's actually happened in Christchurch shows that it hasn't made a difference to the amount that we spend.
It reduces access for problem gamblers. And the Problem Gambling Foundation and the Salvation Army and the likes say that the more access there is, then the more you're going to have an effect on problem gamblers. So reducing the number of machines or venues does help problem gamblers.
Does it?
Disproportionately.
They were very strong supporters of keeping the policy as it was, because from their perspective they felt that moving it to another place just moved the problem somewhere else. It wasn't actually going to change the problem.
No, and they're two different issues. So, the example of moving machines out of Shirley, which is a residential area, into Addington Raceway, which is a gambling area, to me, I couldn't understand why our policy prevented that from happening. You see what I mean? Like that's the actual practical example that we have of how the policy has worked in practice. And so to have no flexibility on relocation hasn't actually helped. If that's true, then reducing the number of machines in Shirley would be a good thing. Because people who go to Addington Raceway go there to gamble. Well, mainly. They might go there for other reasons, but mainly gambling. I don't know. It's just, I kind of would want to see. I personally would have liked to have seen just a little bit of flexibility around venue relocations, rather than a hard and fast blanket rule. So that, if, like the one that was the actual example that we've got, that there could have been some flexibility around that one. But anyway, Glenn, then Ali.
Thank you. My question is about the reference to post-disaster studies. Vicky used the post-disaster study. Vicky referred to situational before, so that's what I'm using exactly here in Christchurch. An unusual situation. Our mental health services are overrun, and I think it's quite reasonable that we must take that into account as a high top consideration. So page 169 in the work with this, the post-disaster studies acknowledge that disasters place added challenges on individuals. For you, is that a strong part of this report? It is.
Yeah.
So we've had a policy up till this time. We're on the other side of natural disasters, still feeling the effects, but obviously that must be taken into.
Yeah.
We are different from other cities.
That was the first question I asked. That was the first question I asked, was whether the earthquake made a difference.
60s may also apply. It's not conclusive.
But the number, sorry,
I was asking whether it was
I'm
a strong-
visually challenged at the moment.
You like my glasses?
That first figure is September 2009. So apart from the spike after the earthquakes,
Yep.
that wasn't maintained. It actually went back to situation normal. So the practical experience doesn't match the overall evidence of a post-disaster impact. Yes, but that's all we're talking about, are the other venues.
Increase from the casino being closed,
Yeah.
and then it would have stayed. All international evidence is that accessibility does impact on.
But if we take out that spike, it hasn't.
Yes, I know, but you would consider in Christchurch there may be other overlaying factors that at play, because we have an increase in all other use of addiction services and of mental health services, so you would expect that to be at play here in Christchurch as well.
Yeah, but then I'd expect to see the numbers going up.
No, but what we've got is a static number we would have expected a drop in normal circumstances.
So if that's provable, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Not seeing this improved.
Yeah, Ellie.
I think one of the issues when we discussed this around the committee was, if I can just draw your attention to 5.15 on page 135, which related to, regardless of, and correct me if I'm wrong, regardless of what the local authority's policy is on gambling, there are circumstances where these are overruled, and that is a good example of that. And what would have been required to change our policy for no reason, because it could be overruled, that's why I certainly voted the way I did on this. Could you just talk to 5.15 a little bit as regards its relevance with any change or not that we would have in Christchurch?
Our policy doesn't allow for relocations per se, but if a venue is moving a short distance, say up to 50 metres, and keeps the same name, keeps the same staff, keeps the same number of machines, then there's legal precedent for that to be able to happen. But it's only, regardless of our policy, but it's only a short distance and it's keeping everything else the same.
What is a short distance?
Up to 50 metres.
Well, about, you could say 50 metres. Or let me see, if you took a TAB or a gambling venue in a mall, then it could just move right down the mall, and the malls are quite large. I think the legal precedent was something like 25 metres.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's true. So I'll put that motion. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yep. Sorry. Glenn.
Okay, I'm going to stand up for this. This is a big deal for me and for a lot of us. We, as a council, have had a long and proud history of upholding this sinking lid policy. And my view on this today is, if you open the door to relocation, you will actually serve to undermine, this is my view, and compromise that policy. And that's why we held fast to it in that previous item when it came before the council earlier in this term, and which was accepted by a majority of 12 to 2. I can give you figures here, they're quite compelling, of the social cost of pokie machine gambling to this city. In terms of lost economic output, it's $13 million a year. Loss of household income is $8 million. Loss of employment, 630 full-time equivalents. Christchurch lost $79.85 million to non-casino gambling machines last year. A fifth of those who use them have a problem, and 2/5 will develop a problem at some point. If we start to compromise on this problem, on this policy, the mental health service providers such as Problem Gambling Foundation, Merck and others will be very dismayed. Take note of page 130. they're pretty clear over that. We've got to keep the policy as it is. As I said, we are known for our sinking lid policy in the city. I think to go back on that today by compromising on this really opens the door to weakening that policy. And I really implore you to hold fast on this.
Yanni?
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point that although the information we've got shows that despite having the sinking lid, the expenditure is staying, roughly the same, I think you also have to recognise that Christchurch, despite having the sinking lid, still has the highest number of machines per 1,000 residents out of any of the major cities. So we actually still have a huge number of machines across our city, which I think means that they are very accessible. And so I think it is probably a little bit hard just to look at and say, well, because the expenditure stayed the same, but this policy hasn't worked. In fact, maybe the expenditure would have been going up exponentially if we had not had a sinking lid. And I would suspect that with everything we know from the health services around the increased demands on our mental health system and on the addiction services, that actually it does seem logical where we've got to. I guess the reason for me asking the question to start with was, is there anything more we should be doing as a city to reduce the harm that's been caused by gambling? Because we know how much harm has been done, and when we look at the map and see that it's the poorest areas and poorest neighbourhoods that are paying that price, I just wonder whether there is any more that we can be doing to try and address some of those negative impacts that gaming has. So I think we can do more work around that as a social issue, but obviously with our policy, I think I support keeping it in place as it currently is, and looking at what other conversations we may need to have with places like DIA or maybe the health system around what the treatment patterns are and what the addiction patterns are, and whether there's anything else that could be done going forward. But I think this council, I agree, this council has a proud record of recognising the harm caused by gaming and trying to address it, and I think we should continue on that path.
David?
Thank you. Look, I'm probably going to take a totally different tact on this. Whilst recognising, that we do have an element in our community that does have a problem with gambling, and we do have problem gamblers. The reality is, and we noted on page 131, there's little evidence that if you relocate these machines outside of the poorer areas of the city, that we actually improve gambling harm. If you're a problem gambler, you'll go anywhere to play the machines, it doesn't matter. I think the other thing, there's two other aspects that I really wanted to address, and this comes down to more our role as funders of community projects, community organisations, sporting groups. And I've had a long and very involved association with a number of sporting groups when we are applying for funding to run our particular activities. The City Council has slashed $1.5 million off its community funding programs, and I noted just in the LTP that for our own ward, I think the community grant scheme has been cut another $7,000. So my concern really, whilst acknowledging problem gambling, is more for the funding of community projects. When we've heard that the level of funding in gaming machines across the city hasn't changed. But what has changed is the number of community groups and sporting groups and other groups that are applying for funds. They are exponentially increasing, and the pool of funds, whilst it may still remain the same in the gaming industry, it's reducing in our pool. The number of people that are applying to it are increasing significantly. Even this morning, we had the Mount Pleasant community group in here who have applied for funds for various things, and they're now resorting to the Merrill Fund to get money for their project. The demand on funds for our community groups is quite exorbitant. So I look at the sinking lid policy, and whilst in general, yes, I do support it, I do think very seriously about its impact on our community to fund projects. The other aspect, so there's two aspects that I'm concerned about, is sinking lid policy, which yes, I could possibly agree with, but the location of machines I think is absurd. And we heard the example that Leanne gave, and I supported her late last year, where we had a community that had 3 gaming machine outlets within 50 metres of each other, each of them with 18 machines. And we had the absurd situation where we could have lowered the number of machines in one venue at the specific request of that venue to relocate them to the Addington Raceway. Our policy declined that activity to occur. I think it was very sensible, and obviously for the reasons of the policy as it stands now, it couldn't happen. So I would actually urge that we perhaps look again at our locations policy. It does seem quite absurd that, you know, on the one hand, it doesn't matter if you take them out of low socio-economic areas that has no impact, and on the other hand, we have a policy that doesn't allow it. So I'm going to vote against the resolution. I would like to see some more work done on it. I believe we have room to move on certain aspects, and particularly where we are in our own funding model, reducing our support for community organisations. I find it quite absurd that we are curtailing the one organisation that picks up the slack. So for a number of reasons, which most of them I've outlined, I will be voting against this proposal today.
Well, I would have I would have voted for an amendment that would allow for a review of the relocations policy only in relation to the removal of machines from areas of, residential areas to locations more suitable, for to a gambling venue such as a raceway. But that amendment hasn't been moved, so I'll put the motion. Sorry?
Yeah.
What would you like to move?
I would like to move that amendment.
That I think that it's probably too late to take an amendment now. That the resolution is that we retain the existing policy unchanged. If that is lost, then we would review that aspect of it. So it's not, because at the moment it is the existing policy. So if people want to see it reviewed, then I think they vote against this resolution, and then we would decide to review it. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. So division. Oh, okay. Okay, so that's carried. So we'll move on to the next item, item 21.